Welcome, everyone. One of the biggest questions I get asked is what training do I need to be a kids yoga teacher? And so that is our topic for today. If you're already teaching kids yoga, or if you're just kind of dipping your toe in the water and seeing what you need to be a kids yoga teacher, if you've been confused by that question. This is the Young Yoga Master's Guide to Children's Yoga Teacher Training. My name is Aruna, and I have been teaching yoga since 1998. I took my first yoga class in 1995 and kind of changed my life like so many other people. And then it took me 3 years to figure out that I hated my job at the time. And I was ready for a change, and I thought, wow, I could be a yoga teacher. So I've been teaching full-time yoga since 2000. And here's what I'm going to try to cover in some detail, but you'll be able to download this guide and read through it. I think the first thing you want to look at is your personal experience or practice of yoga. When it comes to what kind of training do I need, we have people who are school teachers or masters of education, or I've had doctors take the course, or nurses. Like, they have a lot of other training. Sometimes they already have their adult yoga teacher training, sometimes they don't. When I first took my training, I had gone to school, but in political science, so it wasn't really related to it at all. And I had babysat kids. That was the extent of my experience, which turned out wasn't enough. 12 kids or 20 kids is way different than 2 kids. Someone's an ECE, early childhood educator, or a school teacher, or if they've been a Girl Guide leader for years, they may not need the same amount of training to get started as someone who was like me, who kind of just had babysat a few kids, or maybe had a couple of kids of your own at home. That's going to determine what level of training you need to get started. So I will ask people to think about their personal experience and practice in the guide. And when you do it after, you can write that down. This part too is really important, is what are the government regulations for kids yoga teacher? I have in quotes there, who is allowed to teach kids yoga? And people are often surprised to find out that there are no government regulations for teaching yoga. It's not like what's a regulated industry? I think even hairdressers are regulated, actually, which basically means you have to pay a fee to the government every year to maintain your license. Teaching yoga is kind of like being a hockey coach or a gymnastics coach or a baseball coach. Like, it's not regulated by the government. In terms of who's allowed to teach yoga, you could start right now teaching yoga. The big question I ask people is, like, if I were to say to you, oh, can you sub a class for me tomorrow? What would your reaction be? Would you be like, oh crap, no way, I have no idea what to do. Like, what should I do? Whereas you're like, oh yeah, I could go in and I could deliver this, I could deliver that. That would tell you a little bit about, like, are you able to teach yoga? Do you know what to do? In terms of who can teach kids yoga, government regulations for kids yoga teachers, there aren't any that I have heard of. And Yoga Alliance, they're a self-governing yoga industry body. So they're a voluntary registry. They are a big organization. They've got a lot of money behind them. And there have been a few places in the world and the States that have tried to regulate yoga. And actually, Yoga Alliance has stepped in and said, we already are regulating ourselves. And we would rather have people, their theory is, we would rather have people in the yoga industry regulating yoga rather than someone in the government who doesn't really know anything about yoga regulating yoga. That being said, they have a lot to lose. There is a self-interest of self-preservation in them wanting them to be the governing body of yoga as well. So we'll keep that in mind. We won't be it's not totally without some kind of self-motivation there. I have not heard of any regulations, but you may want to just double check in your state or country. You could just put in, like, yoga teacher regulations for your state. I know in Ontario there aren't any. I haven't heard of any in Canada, actually. What you need to start teaching yoga kind of depends on, do you know what to do in a kids yoga class? And then what are your goals? So the first thing I want to do is look at this little chart about the levels of certification. So these are voluntary levels. So you could start teaching now, but if you wanted to register with Yoga Alliance to have that RCYT designation beside your name, that means you have taken a 200-hour training, you've taken a 95-hour training, and you've taught for 30 hours after graduating. So they want to know that you have some experience. Things to note: the 200-hour training all has to be with a registered yoga school. And then the 95-hour training, our training happens to be 96 hours. That all also has to be with the same school. So unfortunately, I've had people who have taken a module of my training and then they're like, well, I already have 30 hours with this training and I've taken a 10-hour training over here. And they're thinking they can just take those, not all those certificates and add up to 95. You can't. And the reason for that is because in each training, like in the 96-hour training, they have certain core competencies, they're called, in educational categories. So the best example I give is practicum. You have to teach 4 hours as the lead trainer of a kids yoga class to get the 95-hour certificate with a registered school. So if you're taking, 6 hours from here, 10 from here, 40 from here, how do you know if you've taught 4 hours? Maybe the practicum is usually the hardest part for a school to oversee. So maybe none of those trainings had any practicum in it. So the only way to ensure that all those core competencies have been achieved is by having it be with one school. That's what I think is the logic behind that. That being said, you can start teaching right away. As we said, there's no government regulations. You're allowed. So we have a lot of people who will take like one module of our training. Usually it's like the yoga literacy or the themes and dreams module, for instance, and they will start teaching it right away, especially if they're a school teacher or a daycare, like they have kids in their life that they have an opportunity to teach, then they'll just start teaching right away because nothing will stop them. There's no reason for them not to. And then eventually a lot of kids yoga teachers will earn their 95-hour certificate. And then in the long term, for people who just see themselves teaching kids, they'll earn all the certificates. So they'll set their sights on this one. A lot of people come in as yoga teachers. They have the 200-hour certificate, so they have that foundation, and then they realize like, oh, I want that. Teaching kids schedule is really nice for a yoga teacher. It's not all evenings and weekends. It's more daytimes. They'll start with the 200-hour training and then they'll get the 95-hour. You can do it in any order. It's up to you, but you can't register as a children's yoga teacher until you have the 200, the 95, and the 30 hours of teaching experience. So the 30 hours of teaching experience is after you graduate. It's just you do it on your own. You just log your hours. It's the honor system. And then you can register, because to say you're RCYT, registered children's yoga teacher, they want you to have some experience. My theory is that if you have a choice between different trainings, you might as well take the Yoga Alliance training. And then here's the other thing with the Yoga Alliance. More than once, I've had a very, very experienced children's yoga teacher take my RCYS training just because they want to be a trainer, and they want to be a lead trainer in a Yoga Alliance registered school. And you can't be a lead trainer unless you have the kids yoga certificate from a registered Yoga Alliance registered school. So they had to go back and get it, even though like they could have been teaching the course. Like a couple of the people who have taken the training like could have easily been teaching the course, but all they needed was that piece of paper. So that's unfortunate. So if they had just picked one from the beginning that was registered, they wouldn't have had to do that.
Is there a time restriction that you have to have it done by?
Right now, that is only for taking it in the online format. So when COVID happened, Yoga Alliance they had a number of deadlines. Like their first deadline was like 4 months that online training was going to be allowed. And then they extended it 1 year, and now they've extended it till December 2023. So that's for the online training provision. The word on the street is that that will become permanent, but it is not official. Once you understand the different levels of certification and maybe your short-term and long-term goals, is to look at what your teaching goals are. So if you're planning on just teaching your kids at home, like, we often have parents who don't really see themselves go out and teaching, but they want to incorporate it into their family life. That might not need as formal a training as if you're planning on going and becoming a kids yoga teacher. So if you're teaching informally versus if you're teaching as an added activity, so if you're already teaching in a classroom or a daycare, or if you're a Girl Guide leader or a Scouts leader or something, a Boys and Girls Club, but you've already got the kids there and you're just adding it in, you could start teaching even from a book or with just ideas. But I think the thing is, eventually, if you see yourself promoting yourself as a kids yoga teacher, I think eventually you'll want to set your sights on that goal of the registered children's yoga teacher designation, because you'll see that in the industry, that is what most of the children's yoga teachers work towards, is the RCYT designation. So you can look at what your goals, and then why is it important, measurable outcome. If you want to call yourself a kids yoga teacher, then the outcome would be to maybe register with Yoga Alliance as a registered children's yoga teacher. But if your goal is help my kids manage their anxiety, because my kid has anxiety and I'm willing to do whatever I can do, then the outcome would be like, does my kid have some tools they can use? You're going to have a different outcome based on your goal. Here's the other question that people need to consider is, will you need insurance? If you're already teaching somewhere like a school teacher or daycare, you're probably covered by your contract for teaching. But if you're going to be a kids yoga teacher and you're going to rent a space, then, for instance, I'm looking at renting a space for the certification, and I need to have insurance. I need to get the room rental. I need to show them my insurance, and I need to have $2 million rather of liability insurance. And so to get that, you will need a certain level of training. Different insurance companies have different amounts of training. I'm with the insurer that if I'm registered with Yoga Alliance, I can automatically be covered. I've heard from a few teachers that it's cheaper than if they went with another insurance company. This is in Canada. So in the US, I've heard prices like all over the board. It seems to go from state to state. You'll want to just ask around. What I recommend is, if you know someone who's a yoga teacher or a kids yoga teacher, just ask them like, oh, do you have insurance and what company? And then just call them up and say, if I were to be a kids yoga teacher, what would I need? And you're going to get a different answer based on where you live. And then that will impact, like, you might as well ask that before you choose your training, because it will help you choose the right training. So when it comes to insurance, it's Gallagher Insurance Company in Ontario or in Canada that Yoga Alliance recommends. If you can even call them and ask them what the rate would be if I'm registered with Yoga Alliance versus if I'm not. And difference in price might actually cover your Yoga Alliance registration. The final point is, like, what training works for your learning style? what I recommend is like, look at the courses you've signed up for. Which ones did you complete? And which ones are still waiting for you to complete? I probably have about, like, I have a little list on one of my whiteboards of the 10 courses I've signed up for that were completely self-paced that I've never actually completed because it's always like another day that I'm going to do them versus when people have to show up at a certain date and time, they tend to show up and it helps people actually get the certificate. That being said, I have had many people, so it's not everybody, but many people who can do a self-paced course, no problem. A lot of people have graduated. So it really depends on what works for your learning style and how you'll actually get the certificate. That's the kind of training that you should choose. The kids yoga training, we do have the self-paced version. And one thing I think that helps with that self-paced training is that you're actually watching a live training. And so you're hearing people's questions and people on graduation day, when I meet them for the final check-in, they're like, oh, sometimes I started answering the question and then I realized I wasn't live. So I think, even that kind of thing, look for like, what do you want to see? Someone that may be annoying to them to be listening to other people's comments. Maybe they just want to hear the trainer, although Yoga Alliance requires peer-to-peer learning. So there should be at least some part in every training of peer-to-peer learning. Look back on the courses you've taken in the past. Which ones did you enjoy? How were they offered? And then when you sign up for something, try to find out a little more details. And then there's a little worksheet here about reviewing and achieving your goals as a kids yoga teacher. And yay, we did it. So if anyone wants to get more information, the 96-hour training is currently self-paced because I'm focusing on the 200-hour training right now. That will start next week and it will be a live Zoom training. So you can still register if you're interested in getting the 200-hour training. The self-paced training is going on. I'm thinking of trying to return to live in person, hybrid format. If we do it at the summer certification, so we could do like the whole 96 hours where like part of it is self-paced, or then we can have live check-ins and then we could come together for like 1 week and do our practicum volunteering at the YMCA where children are already there. We've had a lot of fun doing that in the past, but instead of doing it in 2 weeks now, we could probably do it in 1 week if people want to do a little work before. If you have any thoughts on how you would like to see the live training happening, I have a little survey. When you click in-person training, it takes you to a form. Trying to get your feedback on what kind of training you would like. Complete that form. So thank you everyone for being here. I hope to see you. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.